The phone rang, its shrill tone slicing through the heavy silence of the house. Emily stared at the screen, her heart stopping as she saw the name flash across the display. Mark. She hadn't seen him in hours, not since he'd kissed her goodbye that morning and promised he'd be home early. The warmth of the kiss was still fresh on her skin, yet here she was, standing in the kitchen, her pulse racing at the thought of his call. Her thumb hovered over the screen. Something didn't feel right. Why didn't he just text? Why didn't he come straight home like he said? She answered the phone, attempting to mask the unease that had settled deep within her. "Hey, Mark." But it wasn't Mark who spoke first. "It's done," a woman's voice, low, familiar, said on the other end. Emily froze, her heart crashing into her chest. She didn't need to ask. She knew that voice. It was Susan's, her best friend's. The woman she had known for years, the woman she trusted with everything. A knot twisted in her stomach, the phone slipping from her hand and landing on the kitchen counter with a soft thud. "Are you sure?" Mark's voice came through, faint, but clear. "I'll handle it from here." Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her mind raced, scrambling to process what she was hearing. What did that mean? She didn't know how much longer she stood there, her mind in turmoil, the phone forgotten in her hand. Her heart pounded so loudly in her ears that it drowned out the world around her. But there was no ignoring the reality sinking in, the horrifying realization that she was being lied to, betrayed by the two people she trusted most. Without thinking, she grabbed her purse, her legs moving as if on autopilot. She needed to see him. She needed to confront him, to demand answers, to understand how everything could be falling apart so quickly. As she walked toward the front door, her mind flashed back to just 2 weeks ago, to when she and Mark had celebrated their wedding anniversary. She thought their relationship was perfect, that they had everything they needed. She remembered the laughter, the promises they made to each other, and the way he'd looked at her then. How could all of that vanish so suddenly? How could everything be a lie? Emily had been the kind of woman who always trusted, always gave her heart fully, especially when it came to Mark. She remembered the day they met, how he made her feel special in a way no one else ever had. He was charming, funny, and thoughtful. He always knew what to say to make her smile, and they'd built a life together that felt unshakable. At least, that's what she thought. Flashbacks of their wedding day resurfaced in her mind as she drove, tears threatening to spill as the memory of their vows echoed in her ears. "I promise to always be here, for better or for worse." What a joke, she thought bitterly. She pulled into the driveway of their house. It was too quiet. The place that had once felt like a home now felt like a hollow shell, a lie in itself. She stepped out of the car, her shoes clicking sharply against the pavement as she made her way to the front door. Each step felt heavier than the last. She paused. The door was unlocked. That was strange. Mark never left the door unlocked. Her hands trembled as she turned the handle. The door creaked open, and she stepped inside. The smell of freshly baked cookies, the same scent that always greeted her when she came home, was gone. In its place was a sterile, cold air that made her stomach churn. She walked slowly, her breath shallow, each room more empty than the last. When she reached the living room, her gaze immediately fell on the couch. There, lying in the most casual of positions, was Mark. He was staring at the ceiling, his hands clasped behind his head, as if nothing had happened. Her heart dropped into her stomach. "Mark," she whispered, her voice barely audible, yet cutting through the thick silence. "What the hell is going on?" Mark didn't even flinch. He slowly turned his head to her, a slow smile spreading across his face, but it wasn't a smile of recognition. It was a smile that felt more like an apology, one that hadn't yet been spoken. "Hey, Emily," he said, as though they hadn't just been ripped apart by a truth he couldn't hide anymore. "You're home early." Emily's fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to demand answers, but her voice wouldn't cooperate. She took a deep breath, her thoughts swirling. She had to get him to tell the truth. "You've been lying to me," she said finally, her voice steady, but her words were sharp enough to cut through the air. "What's going on, Mark?" The smile faded from his face, replaced by a look she couldn't quite place. Guilt? Fear? Emily couldn't tell, but she didn't care. She wasn't going to let him get away with this. He sat up slowly, his posture tense. I didn't mean for it to happen like this, Em." Emily narrowed her eyes. "You didn't mean for what to happen? The affair with Susan? The lies? The deceit?" Mark's eyes widened, and for a moment, Emily could see the weight of the truth press down on him. He looked like a man cornered, desperate to escape. He started, but the words faltered. "Don't you dare lie to me again," Emily said, her voice growing stronger. "I know everything." She turned to leave the room, her mind a blur of emotions she could no longer control. Anger, hurt, disbelief. She had always known that something had been off, but she had ignored the signs. She had trusted him, and now she felt like a fool. Mark's voice stopped her before she could walk out the door. "Emily, please. It's not what you think." She paused, but didn't turn around. "Then tell me what it is, Mark. Because right now, all I see is betrayal." The words hit harder than anything he could have said. She walked out of the house, slamming the door behind her. Her world had just shattered, and she didn't know how to put it back together. As she stood on the porch, looking out into the darkening evening, Emily realized something she had never considered before. She had been living a lie. The man she had loved, the man she had trusted, was not the person she thought he was. And now there was no turning back. The betrayal had cut deeper than anything she had ever imagined. As the night deepened, Emily's mind wouldn't stop racing. The echoes of Mark's voice, Susan's betrayal, and her own shattered heart kept her awake, consumed with the weight of everything she had just learned. There was one thing she knew for certain now: nothing would ever be the same again. And she wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was only hours after that confrontation that Emily found herself staring blankly at the same walls she had once called home. The house, which had once held the warmth of family and love, now felt like a cold prison. She couldn't escape the images of Mark and Susan together, whispering behind her back, plotting her demise without her even knowing. The anger, the hurt, the sense of betrayal, it all swirled inside her like a storm that wouldn't settle. Her phone buzzed. Emily didn't need to look at it to know who it was. Mark had been calling nonstop since she'd stormed out earlier, but she refused to pick up. The last thing she wanted was to hear his voice, the voice of the man who'd promised to love her, who had vowed to cherish her, only to betray her in the most devastating way possible. She collapsed onto the couch, feeling the weight of the evening press down on her shoulders. Her eyes drifted toward the photo on the mantel, Mark, Lily, and herself at their family beach vacation last summer. The picture seemed so distant now, like it belonged to another life. A life that no longer existed. How could I have been so blind? She thought bitterly. How did I not see it coming? Her mind retraced the past few months, the subtle signs she had ignored, the late nights Mark came home, smelling of cologne she didn't recognize, the times he'd seemed distant, distracted. She should have known. She should have paid more attention. But she had been too trusting, too secure in the love they shared. As she sat there, lost in her thoughts, memories began to flood her mind, memories of better times, when life was simpler, when the future seemed so full of promise. It was their wedding day, and Emily had never felt more beautiful or more loved. Mark stood beside her at the altar, a radiant smile on his face, his eyes filled with love. The sun shone brightly through the stained glass windows of the church, casting colorful reflections on the floor. Emily could still remember the way he had looked at her, his voice thick with emotion as he recited his vows. I promise to love you in all circumstances, to stand by you through thick and thin, for richer or poorer, in sickness and in health. You are my heart, Emily, and I will always be yours. She had believed every word. The wedding had been perfect. Their honeymoon, even more so. For a long time, Emily had believed that nothing could tear them apart, that they were unstoppable together. But now, as she sat in the cold, dark house, those vows seemed like nothing more than empty promises. She couldn't shake the feeling that everything she had known, everything she had built, was a lie. The phone buzzed again, and this time, Emily felt an overwhelming sense of dread wash over her. She grabbed it, half expecting to see Mark's name, but it wasn't. It was from Susan. Her stomach churned as she hesitated, staring at the screen. For a moment, she considered blocking Susan's number, cutting ties with the woman who had been like a sister to her. But a part of her, some dark, masochistic part of her, wanted to hear what Susan had to say. Maybe she'll apologize, Emily thought bitterly, though she knew it was unlikely. She tapped the screen, the message popping up in front of her. Susan, I'm so sorry, Emily. I never wanted it to happen this way. Can we talk? Please. I owe you an explanation. Emily's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She wanted to scream, to tell Susan exactly what she thought of her, of the betrayal, the lies, the broken trust. But she didn't. Instead, she typed a simple reply. Emily, we'll talk tomorrow. I need some time. She didn't know if that was true. She didn't know if she was ready to face the woman who had stolen her husband, who had violated the sacred trust they'd shared for so many years. But Emily knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to let this go. The night was long. Emily tossed and turned in her bed, unable to find any comfort. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw images of Mark with Susan, their whispers, their lies, their betrayal. It was suffocating. But it wasn't just the affair that haunted her. It was the realization that Mark had been living a double life. What else had he hidden from her? What else had he lied about? How many other secrets had he kept locked away? And then, there was the gut-wrenching thought that had been creeping into her mind since the moment she had heard that phone call, that maybe, just maybe, Mark had never truly loved her. Maybe the life they built was nothing more than an illusion, a facade. It was a quiet afternoon in their kitchen. Mark had been working from home, his laptop open in front of him, while Emily prepared dinner. They talked casually, as they always did, about their day. He smiled, made small talk, and everything felt normal, comfortable. Then, there was that one moment when Emily had caught a glimpse of something she couldn't quite explain. Mark's phone had buzzed. He didn't pick it up, but his expression faltered, just for a second. Emily hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now, sitting in the silence of their home, the memory of that fleeting moment echoed in her mind. That was the first real sign, the first crack in the perfect life they had seemed to share. But she had brushed it off, assuming it was nothing. She never imagined it would lead to this. Emily sat up, wiping away the tears that had fallen without her noticing. She couldn't keep going like this, letting the pain of the past consume her. She had to know the truth. She had to confront Mark, not just for the betrayal, but for herself. Taking a deep breath, she stood up. The room felt colder now, more oppressive. The clock on the wall ticked in a steady rhythm, reminding her of the passing time she couldn't afford to waste. Tomorrow, she thought. Tomorrow I will face him. I will demand the truth. But for now, all she could do was wait. The next morning, Emily woke early. The house was still. Mark hadn't come home the night before, and she wasn't sure if he would come back at all. Her mind was racing, but she knew she had to take control. No more passive waiting. No more pretending everything was fine. She would find out what had happened, no matter what it took. As she prepared herself for the day ahead, Emily looked at the photo of their family once more. It still hurt to look at it, but she promised herself that she would get through this. She would not let this define her. This isn't the end, she thought fiercely. It's just the beginning. The day stretched out before her, full of uncertainty, but also full of determination. Emily knew one thing for sure: she wasn't going to let the betrayal break her. She was going to fight for the truth. And she would get the answers she deserved. The moment Emily closed the door behind her, she felt a strange shift. The weight of the night's revelations still hung heavy on her chest, but there was something different about the silence that enveloped the house. She couldn't place it, but it felt like a shift in the air, a subtle change in the atmosphere, as if the house itself were holding its breath along with her. She tried to focus, to organize her thoughts, but it was hard. All she wanted was to forget for just a moment, to erase the image of Mark and Susan from her mind. The phone buzzed again. A new message. "Mark, please, Emily. Let's talk. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. I'm sorry." She could hear the sincerity in his words, or at least, that's what he wanted her to believe. But how could she ever trust him again? How could she believe anything he said? She put the phone down, closed her eyes, and for a moment, she allowed herself to go numb. The pain was too much to bear, too overwhelming. She didn't know how much longer she could keep this facade of calm. The last 24 hours had been a blur: her confrontation with Mark, her conversation with Susan, the lies, the anger, the betrayal. It was all too much, too fast. It was that night that everything changed. Emily had been lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about everything and nothing. The loneliness of her bed felt almost suffocating, a stark contrast to the years she'd spent wrapped up in Mark's arms. But now she felt nothing but emptiness. Then it happened. It wasn't a loud crash or a sudden jolt of fear. It was a soft whisper of a sensation that came over her like a wave. One moment, she was lying there, trying to calm her breathing, and the next, everything went black. She didn't even feel the fall. One second, she was conscious, heart racing, thoughts swirling, and the next, there was nothing. Emily had no idea how much time passed. It could have been minutes, it could have been hours. She didn't know. But when she finally opened her eyes, she was no longer in her bedroom. She wasn't anywhere she recognized. At first, she thought it was a dream. She tried to sit up, but there was a weight to the air around her, an oppressive feeling that made it hard to breathe. She looked around, her eyes scanning what appeared to be an endless darkness. There was no sound, no light, nothing. Then, as if in response to her thoughts, a figure appeared in front of her. It was blurry at first, the edges shifting like smoke. But as the figure came into focus, Emily realized who it was. It was Mark. He looked different, almost like a ghost. His eyes were wide and vacant, filled with something she couldn't place. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. Instead, the darkness seemed to grow thicker around him, swallowing the space between them. Emily tried to move toward him, to call out his name, but no words left her lips. Her body felt like it didn't belong to her. She reached out, desperate to connect, to understand what was happening, but Mark's form faded before her eyes, leaving nothing but the consuming darkness. She didn't know how long she wandered through that emptiness. She didn't know what was happening or why, but something in her knew this was no ordinary dream. Something in her knew that what she was experiencing was real, more real than anything she'd ever known. And then, as suddenly as it had all begun, the darkness shifted. Emily awoke with a sharp gasp, her body jerking upright in bed, her heart racing as if she had just been running for her life. The room was cold, the air stale, but it wasn't just the temperature that made her shiver. It was the feeling that lingered, the overwhelming sense of disorientation. She blinked, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Was it a dream? A nightmare? Or something else entirely? The room was silent. too silent. But something felt off, like the space between her and the world around her was just a little thinner, as if something important had shifted while she was unconscious. She reached for her phone, her hands trembling as she unlocked it. She had to check. She needed to know what time it was, what was happening. It was 11:38 p.m. She had no memory of the hours leading up to this moment. No memory of how she'd fallen asleep or what had come before. All she had was a profound sense of loss and a strange, unsettling certainty that something had changed in her. But as she stared at the phone, her eyes suddenly caught on something else, an image in her gallery she didn't remember taking. It was a screenshot of a message. "Susan, I'll make sure Mark doesn't get away with this. We'll fix everything, Emily. Just trust me." Emily's mind raced. What was this? Why didn't I see this before? Her fingers hovered over the screen, her pulse quickening as she read the message again. This wasn't from Susan's usual apology. This was something else. A threat? A promise? The words felt like a riddle, wrapped in lies. But before she could process it further, another sensation overtook her, the same one she had felt moments before she'd slipped into unconsciousness. A surge of confusion, as if her body were fighting to understand something it wasn't supposed to know. Then, she remembered. The last thing she had heard before the darkness claimed her. The words, Mark's voice a whisper barely audible. "I'm sorry, Emily. I didn't mean to lose you like this. But she's the one who will save us." And then nothing. Nothing but the blackness that had come for her. A chill ran down Emily's spine as she sat in the quiet of her bedroom, the eerie stillness pressing against her. She had died for 10 minutes. But in that time, she had seen things, felt things that were impossible to ignore. Things that didn't make sense. Things that couldn't be real. But now she wasn't so sure. What had Mark meant by she? And why had Susan been involved? The truth was slipping away from her, just out of reach, like a thread unraveling. And Emily knew one thing for certain: she had to get to the bottom of it. There were things buried deep, dark secrets she had no choice but to uncover. And now she had no intention of letting them remain hidden. Emily stood from the bed, her mind made up. She would not let this go. She would find out what had happened to her, who had been pulling the strings behind the scenes, and what dark forces had played a part in the life she had thought was her own. Tomorrow, she would confront Mark. She would confront Susan. She would make them face the truth, even if it meant walking into the darkness herself. And when she did, she would uncover the secrets that had been hidden from her for so long. Nothing was going to stop her. The sun had barely risen, and Emily was already on edge. She couldn't shake the lingering feeling that something far worse than the betrayal had just been revealed to her in those 10 minutes of unconsciousness. The images, the shadows, the cryptic messages played in her mind like an unsettling movie she couldn't stop watching. She paced around the kitchen, absent-mindedly making coffee, her thoughts drifting back to the strange, vivid sensation she had experienced after her near-death moment. The voice, the figure of Mark, the eerie darkness. She couldn't make sense of it, but the more she thought about it, the clearer it became. There was more at play here than just an affair. She wasn't sure who was behind it or what was truly happening, but Emily knew one thing for certain. The world she thought she knew had been shattered beyond repair. And now she was determined to rebuild it on her terms. The house felt empty when Emily returned from her walk, and the weight of the silence hit her as soon as she opened the door. Mark had still not returned, and Emily felt the strange pull of the unknown. It felt as though the universe itself was conspiring against her. She hadn't heard from Susan, and for a brief moment, Emily wondered if the message she'd seen in her phone gallery had even been real. Maybe it was a part of her subconscious trying to make sense of the chaos. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just a figment of her imagination. It was too real, too precise. After all, how could Susan know anything about her visions? How could she have known about Mark's apology, about his cryptic words? Emily was snapped out of her thoughts by the sound of her phone buzzing again. She looked down, her heart skipping a beat. It was Mark. His name on the screen felt like a reminder of everything that had gone wrong in the past 48 hours. She hesitated for only a moment before answering. Mark. There was a long pause on the other end, the silence thick with unsaid words. She could almost feel the weight of his guilt pressing through the line. Emily, he finally said, his voice softer than she remembered. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be. But I need you to understand something. It's not what you think. Emily felt her breath hitch. Of course, it wasn't what I think. It never is. She had heard enough of his excuses, but there was something in his voice now, something different that made her hesitate. What do you mean, Mark? What the hell do you think I think? She asked, frustration rising in her chest. You've betrayed me. You've betrayed us. He exhaled sharply on the other end of the line. No, I'm not talking about Susan. I'm talking about something bigger. Something you don't know about. There's more to this than you can imagine. Emily's pulse quickened, her mind racing. What are you talking about? What is it? Mark began, but his words faltered. Emily, I'm so sorry. But you need to hear the whole story. You need to understand why I did what I did. Emily felt the anger boiling inside her, but something in his tone, something in his hesitation, made her pause. Mark had always been a good liar, but this was different. There was an underlying fear in his voice that she couldn't ignore. You'll have answers soon, Mark continued. But you need to meet me. Tonight. There's no way around it. I can't say everything over the phone. Emily felt a wave of unease wash over her. Every part of her screamed to tell him to stay away, to end this once and for all. But there was a nagging feeling inside her. One that told her she needed to hear him out. She needed to understand what was really going on. Where? She asked, her voice quiet. Meet me at the old house, Mark said, the words sending a chill down her spine. The one we used to talk about, the one on the outskirts of town. The mention of the old house brought back memories. It had been years since they'd talked about it. It was a place they had once considered buying together, a place that felt like the promise of a fresh start before life got in the way. Why was he bringing it up now? Fine, Emily said, more out of curiosity than anything else. I'll be there. Thank you, Mark whispered. I swear, you'll understand everything once you know the truth. Emily hung up, the phone slipping from her hand as her mind spiraled. The old house. The place they had dreamed of together. And now it felt like the key to everything. She had no idea what she was walking into, but something told her she wasn't going to like what she found. As the evening drew closer, Emily could feel the tension building inside her. The shadows in her mind, memories, fears, doubts, pressed against her, making it harder to breathe. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to break wide open. She dressed quickly, her hands shaking as she pulled on a jacket. She couldn't afford to be late. But every part of her felt like it was warning her to turn back, to forget this madness and start fresh somewhere else. But she couldn't. She had to know the truth. The drive to the old house felt longer than it should have. Emily's thoughts raced with every mile, but as the silhouette of the house came into view, a strange sense of familiarity washed over her. The house had stood there, alone and forgotten, for years. It was a relic of the past, a symbol of hope that had never quite come to fruition. As she pulled into the overgrown driveway, Emily's heart pounded in her chest. She couldn't see much of the house in the dim light, but she could make out the crumbling edges of the roof, the dark windows that seemed to stare back at her like hollow eyes. There was something eerie about the place that made her stomach turn. She stepped out of the car, her boots crunching against the gravel, the air thick with tension. The door to the house was ajar, the dim light from the inside casting long shadows across the front porch. Taking a deep breath, Emily made her way inside. The house smelled musty old. Dust hung in the air like a memory that hadn't been disturbed in years. She called out for Mark, her voice echoing through the empty space. "Mark," she said, her voice trembling slightly. There was no answer. She stepped farther into the house, her footsteps hollow against the hardwood floor. The silence felt oppressive, like the walls themselves were waiting for something to happen. Then, she heard a sound, faint at first, like a whisper, but then clearer. It was Mark's voice. But it wasn't just Mark. There was someone else in the room. "Mark," she called again, fear creeping into her voice. The figure emerged from the shadows, and for a moment, Emily couldn't believe her eyes. It wasn't Mark. It was Susan. And she wasn't alone. Emily froze in place, her heart skipping a beat. What was Susan doing here? And why had Mark brought her into this place? She opened her mouth to speak, but Susan's voice stopped her before she could say anything. "I'm sorry, Emily," Susan said, her eyes soft but strained. "But I never wanted you to find out like this. There's more, so much more than you can understand." Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The words hung in the air, thick with tension. Emily's heart raced as she stood frozen in the doorway, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. The figure of Susan, standing so calmly in front of her, was the last thing she expected. And yet, somehow, it felt inevitable. Susan, the woman who had been her best friend, her confidant, was now the last person she would ever trust. But there was something in her eyes, something genuine but equally unsettling. She didn't seem guilty or ashamed, not in the way Emily expected her to. "Why are you here, Susan?" Emily's voice was low but firm. "What is this?" Susan stepped forward slowly, her hands raised in a gesture of peace, though Emily wasn't sure if she wanted peace. "I didn't want to be here, Emily. Not like this. I swear, I didn't mean for you to find out this way, but you needed to know. All of it. You've been kept in the dark for too long." Emily shook her head, her mind clouded with confusion and anger. "No. You don't get to talk to me like that. You betrayed me. You both did. I don't care what you're trying to explain. There's nothing that justifies this." Susan's face softened, her expression full of sorrow. I know. But this is bigger than just the two of us, Emily. This is about something neither of us fully understood at first. Mark, he didn't know what he was getting into. Neither of us did. Emily took a step back, feeling her chest tighten. She wanted to scream, to tell Susan to shut up, but something inside her, some dark, gnawing part of her, told her to listen. "Bigger than you two?" Emily repeated. "What does that even mean? What could possibly be bigger than the lies you told me?" "Listen," Susan said, her voice growing urgent. "You need to hear me out. I've been trying to protect you, both of you. But everything's starting to unravel and there's no way to stop it now. I thought if I stayed away, if I kept you both in the dark, we could avoid the inevitable. But now, it's too late." Emily took a deep breath, her body trembling with both fury and fear. "I'm listening," she said, her voice tight. "So you better start talking. And you better make it good." Susan glanced toward the darkened hallway, where the faint outline of Mark's figure could be seen, standing in the shadows, his face unreadable. His presence was a constant reminder of the betrayal that had rocked Emily's world. And yet, here he was, standing next to Susan, like they were in on some grand secret that she was being kept out of. "Mark, he's not the man you think he is," Susan began, her voice quieter now, almost as if she were afraid someone else might hear. "The affair, yes. That's part of it. But it's not the whole story. We're all caught up in something much bigger than we ever imagined." Emily's mind raced. "What do you mean? What's bigger than this? Are you trying to tell me this is some kind of conspiracy or secret plot? That this is some kind of reason for your betrayal?" Her voice broke as the words left her mouth, a mix of disbelief and rising anger. Susan shook her head slowly. It's not that simple, Emily. You think this is just about Mark and me, don't you? That we got caught up in something bad and you're the innocent victim here. But you've been part of it, too. You've been involved in this from the very beginning. Emily's heart stopped for a moment. What do you mean? She barely managed to whisper the words, a chill running down her spine. What are you talking about? Susan's eyes were wide, almost desperate as she met Emily's gaze. You think your life has been normal, that it's been real, don't you? That everything you've built with Mark is authentic. But what if I told you it's been manipulated from the start? What if I told you that you've been living a lie? Mark finally spoke, his voice gravelly and distant. I tried to tell you, Emily. You need to hear this. You deserve the truth. Emily felt the ground beneath her tremble, as though the very foundation of her life was being shattered, piece by piece. She took a step back, her breath shallow. No, this doesn't make sense. I don't understand. Think back, Emily, Susan pressed on, her tone urgent. Think about everything you've ever trusted, everything you've believed about Mark, about me, about the life you built together. What if I told you it's all been set in motion, planned out for years, before any of us even knew what was happening? Emily's mind reeled, struggling to make sense of the words. Stop, she said, her voice rising with frustration. This is insane. You're telling me my entire life is a lie? That Mark isn't who he says he is? What do you mean set in motion? How do you even know this? I know because I've been a part of it, Susan replied, her voice softer now, filled with regret. Because I've seen the consequences and I couldn't walk away. I tried, but I couldn't. Emily's eyes widened as the pieces started to fall into place, though she still couldn't grasp the full picture. What do you mean you've seen the consequences? Mark stepped into the dim light, his eyes locked on Emily with a mixture of guilt and something else, something darker. Susan's right. But there's more. There's so much more. You need to hear the truth from both of us. If you don't, you'll never understand. The silence in the room felt suffocating, and for the first time since all of this had started, Emily wasn't sure what to do. She wasn't sure who to trust. Mark and Susan were standing before her, the two people she thought she could count on more than anyone else, both claiming that her entire life had been manipulated, planned, and twisted. Emily's thoughts collided with each other, fragments of suspicion and fear all jumbled together. Tell me everything, Emily demanded, her voice unwavering. I want to know the truth. No more lies. No more games. Susan hesitated, her face creased with pain. It started years ago. When we met Mark, when we thought everything was perfect. That was when they first started watching. Who's they? Emily interrupted, her heart pounding. Susan exchanged a glance with Mark before speaking again, her voice low and grave. The people who control everything. The people who orchestrate lives. You're not just part of a story, Emily. You've always been part of their story. Mark and I, we were chosen. And so were you. Emily could feel the blood drain from her face as the implications of what Susan was saying began to sink in. She wanted to scream, to run, to get out of this nightmare. But she couldn't. Because somehow, deep down, she knew this was the truth. She was trapped in a story she hadn't written. And the consequences were far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed from somewhere deep within the house, followed by a distant, eerie laugh. It wasn't Mark's voice. It wasn't Susan's. It was a voice Emily didn't recognize. And it sounded like it was coming closer. Without thinking, Emily grabbed for the nearest thing to defend herself, an old, rusted metal rod lying against the wall, and turned to face whatever was about to emerge from the shadows. She was done running. Done pretending everything was fine. This was her fight now. And she was going to find out who had been pulling the strings all along. The sound of the distant laughter echoed again, more chilling this time, reverberating through the walls of the decaying house. Emily's heart skipped a beat. It wasn't just the eerie sound that made her pulse race, it was the feeling that came with it. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up as if some unseen presence was closing in on her, a presence far darker than anything she had experienced before. Susan's face turned pale, her eyes wide with fear, and she took a step back, her voice barely above a whisper. "We weren't supposed to be here. This was never supposed to happen. He's coming." Emily could barely hear her over the blood rushing in her ears. "Who's coming? Who the hell are you talking about?" She gripped the metal rod in her hands tighter, her knuckles white, but she was trembling. She didn't know what was happening, but every instinct screamed that something far worse than a simple affair had been unfolding right beneath her nose. Mark, who had been eerily silent up until now, finally spoke. His voice was tight with fear. "We don't have time for this. Emily, you need to understand what's happening. The people Susan and I have been involved with, these people, they're not just trying to control us. They've been watching you too. The moment you woke up, everything changed." Emily's mind spun. "What do you mean, watching me? What are you talking about, Mark? Who are these people?" Before Mark could answer, another loud crash came from the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps, slow, deliberate, and heavy. Emily's pulse surged. The presence was growing stronger, and it wasn't just the sound that unsettled her. It was the air itself, like the entire house was holding its breath, waiting for something. She felt her legs go weak, but she forced herself to stand tall. "Mark. Susan. What the hell is going on here? What is this? Who's after us?" Susan looked down at her feet, her eyes clouded with regret, as though every word she had said was weighing down on her. She took a step forward, her voice shaky. "I never wanted you to get mixed up in this. But I couldn't protect you anymore. I couldn't let them keep you in the dark." "Them?" Emily repeated, her mind racing. "Who are they? And why are we in danger?" Mark's voice was filled with urgency now. "Emily, you've got to listen. There's no going back. This was never just about us, or about me cheating, or about any of the things you think happened. It was about something much bigger. Something they've been orchestrating for years." Emily's grip on the metal rod tightened as the footsteps grew louder. She could feel her breath quickening, a surge of adrenaline coursing through her veins. "Who?" she demanded. "Who's behind all of this? You're telling me this is some sort of conspiracy? Some big plan? Are you insane?" She could barely finish the sentence when a figure emerged from the shadows at the end of the hallway. He was tall, far taller than anyone she'd ever known, his figure looming ominously in the half-light. His face was partially obscured, but there was something about his movements that made Emily's stomach drop. It was like he was gliding toward them, not walking, as if he weren't fully bound by the physical world. The figure stepped into the light, and Emily saw his face. It was one she didn't recognize, but somehow it was also familiar. His eyes, cold, unblinking, were filled with a strange intensity, and his mouth twisted into a barely perceptible smile. "Ah," the man said, his voice smooth and deep, carrying an unsettling calmness. "It seems we've all come together at last." Emily felt her breath catch in her throat. Her instincts screamed at her to run, but her feet were frozen to the floor. She didn't know if it was the terror of the unknown or the strange power that seemed to radiate from the man, but she couldn't look away. The man's eyes locked onto Emily's, and for a moment, it felt like he was seeing right through her, past all the layers of grief, anger, and betrayal. It was as if he could see into her very soul. "Emily," he said, and there was a dark amusement in his voice, like he was savoring the moment. "So good of you to join us. I've been waiting for this." "Waiting for this?" Emily repeated, her voice barely a whisper. "Who the hell are you?" The man stepped closer, his movements unnervingly fluid. "You don't recognize me? How disappointing. But I suppose that's to be expected. After all, you've been kept in the dark for so long." "I'm not afraid of you," Emily managed, though her voice trembled. "Don't be so sure of that," he replied, his smile widening just slightly. "I'm not the one you should be afraid of." The ones who have been controlling you are much closer than you realize. And now we're all connected in ways you can't even begin to understand. Mark's voice broke in, desperate. Stop, Alaric. Please. You don't have to do this. Alaric raised a hand, and Mark fell silent immediately. There was no force, no violence, just a quiet, invisible power that seemed to hold Mark in place. The room seemed to tilt, as though the very air was shifting around them. Emily felt a chill crawl down her spine. Alaric, she whispered. What do you want? Alaric didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned his gaze back to Susan, his expression darkening slightly. You were always so careful, Susan, he said, his voice laced with disappointment. But in the end, you couldn't protect her. You couldn't protect yourself. Susan's face twisted in anguish. I tried, she whispered. I really tried. Enough, Alaric snapped. He turned back to Emily, his eyes narrowing. It's time you knew the truth, Emily. All of it. There was a long pause before he spoke again, and when he did, his voice was colder, more foreboding than ever. Your life, Emily, was never your own. It was always part of a larger plan. You were chosen, just like Mark. Just like Susan. Emily blinked, her mind spinning with disbelief. Chosen for what? To be a piece in a game much bigger than you can imagine, Alaric said softly, almost like he was explaining something trivial. You've been under surveillance since the day you were born, Emily. Your entire existence has been curated, designed, planned, controlled. And now he paused, letting the weight of his words sink in, his voice lowering to a near whisper. Now, it's time for you to fulfill your part in the plan. Emily's stomach churned. This couldn't be real. She had lived a normal life. She had made choices. She had loved. She had believed in the truth of her own existence. But now, she wasn't so sure. Before she could respond, a sudden noise echoed from behind them, followed by the unmistakable sound of a door slamming shut. Emily spun around, her heart racing in her chest. A figure appeared in the doorway, silhouetted by the fading light. It was another person she knew, someone who had been part of her life for years, but seeing them now, standing there in the doorway, felt like a betrayal in itself. This person, this last player in the twisted game, was about to reveal everything. And Emily wasn't sure if she was ready to face what came next. The figure in the doorway stepped forward into the dim light, and Emily's breath caught in her throat. Her heart seemed to stop as she took in the familiar face, but it wasn't a face that should have been here, not in this place, not under these circumstances. It was Tom, her brother. For a moment, time stood still. Her brain scrambled to make sense of the impossible. Why is he here? The words felt foreign in her mouth as she struggled to process the sight of him, standing just a few feet away, his expression unreadable. Tom, Emily breathed, her voice barely a whisper. What are you doing here? Tom didn't answer immediately. Instead, he glanced at Alaric, who stood calmly beside Susan and Mark, his cold, calculating eyes never leaving Emily's face. Tom's gaze flickered briefly between the two of them before settling on Emily. You shouldn't have come, Em, Tom said softly, his voice tinged with something that felt like regret. You weren't supposed to be a part of this. None of this was supposed to involve you. Emily stepped back, her heart pounding. What is this? What is going on? I thought I knew you, Tom. I thought we were a family. But now, this? What the hell is this? Tom's face tightened, a flash of guilt crossing his features. He ran a hand through his hair, as if debating how much to reveal. I never wanted to lie to you, he said, his voice wavering slightly. But the truth is, you were always part of this plan, Emily. You were always a piece in something much bigger than you could ever imagine. Her mind raced. A piece? What do you mean? All these years, I've trusted you. I've loved you, Tom. You're involved in this? With them? She gestured angrily at Alaric and Susan, but she couldn't tear her eyes away from her brother. What's going on? Why didn't you warn me? Tom swallowed hard, his jaw clenching. Because if I had, you wouldn't have believed me. You wouldn't have trusted me. You would have run from the truth. Hell, I probably would have too if I hadn't already been so deep into it. Alaric stepped forward, his presence looming over the group like a shadow. He watched Tom with a mix of satisfaction and something else, something that seemed dangerously close to amusement. You see, Emily, you've always been part of the plan. From the very beginning, even before your birth. You were chosen like Mark, like Susan, like all of us. Everything in your life, every little piece of it, has been orchestrated to lead you here. Emily's mind felt like it was unraveling, thread by thread. What do you mean, orchestrated? Her world, the life she'd built, the relationships she'd trusted, was coming apart at the seams, and the truth was slipping through her fingers like sand. Tom spoke again, his voice quieter, almost hesitant. Emily, I didn't have a choice. None of us did. We were all selected for this. Our lives, our fates, they were sealed before we even knew it. Selected? By who? Emily asked, her voice rising in frustration. Why? What did we do? Why were we chosen for this? Alaric smiled, the eerie smile of someone who had control of the situation, someone who had been playing this game for far longer than Emily could fathom. It's not about what you did, Emily. It's about who you are. You were chosen because of your potential, because of what you represent. What do I represent? She demanded, her voice growing desperate. What the hell does any of this mean? Mark, who had been silent for most of the conversation, finally spoke up, his voice trembling with emotion. It means you were always meant to be part of this, he said softly. This isn't just a coincidence, Emily. Your connection to us, to everything that's happening, it's been planned out for years. Your life, your choices, everything you thought you had control over. It's all been manipulated. Emily's mind was spinning. Manipulated? How could she have been manipulated? She had lived her life, made choices, loved, suffered, laughed, all those years she'd spent thinking her life was her own. But now it seemed like it was all just a script someone else had written for her. You're lying, she spat, her voice shaking with anger. You have to be lying. This isn't real. None of this makes sense. How could you, Tom? You're my brother. How could you be involved in this? Whatever this is. Tom stepped forward, his eyes filled with pain. I didn't have a choice, Emily. None of us did. From the moment I was born, my life was mapped out for me. And yours was too. Alaric nodded, his expression unreadable. You see, Emily, we've all been carefully selected, groomed for a greater purpose. We are part of something far larger than anything you can imagine. You were born into it. And now we're reaching the critical stage of the plan. A plan for what? Emily asked, her voice trembling with confusion and disbelief. A plan to change the world, Alaric answered, his eyes glinting with an unsettling sense of purpose. To shift the balance of power, to control the future. We are the players in this game, Emily. And you are the final piece. Emily's stomach churned as she processed his words. I don't believe you. I can't believe you. You're telling me I was born to be a pawn in some twisted game. You've always been a part of the game, Alaric confirmed, his tone cold, calculating. You just didn't know it. But now it's time to play your part. Everything you've ever done, every choice you've ever made, has led you here. And now it's time to see the world for what it really is. Emily's mind was a whirl of emotions, fear, anger, confusion, but beneath it all was a deep, gnawing sense of betrayal. Everything she had known to be true was collapsing, and the people she had trusted most. Her brother, her best friend, even Mark had all been involved in this larger conspiracy. Alaric turned his gaze back to the others, his eyes gleaming with the cold satisfaction of someone who knew the game was almost won. It's time, Emily. There's no turning back now. Emily felt the walls closing in around her. The truth, as horrible as it was undeniable. And now, she had to face the reality that she was part of something far bigger than she had ever imagined. A part of a plan she had never chosen, but one that had always been her fate. But as the weight of the revelation settled over her, a fire began to burn inside her. She wasn't going to be a pawn in anyone's game. This was her life, and she would fight for it, whatever it took. "You're wrong," she said, her voice shaking but steady. "I'm not part of your plan. I'm not part of this game. And I will fight until the very end to destroy everything you've worked for." Alaric's smile faltered, just for a moment, before it returned. "We'll see about that, Emily. We'll see." As the room fell silent, the weight of her words hung in the air, like the calm before a storm. Emily knew she couldn't back down now. She was no longer just a piece in their game. She was going to take control of her own story. And nothing, no one, was going to stop her. Emily's heart thundered in her chest as she stood in the dimly lit room, her hands still gripping the metal rod, her pulse pounding like a drumbeat in her ears. She had just made her declaration, but inside, she could feel the weight of the situation crashing down on her. She wasn't just facing a betrayal from the people she loved. She was facing something far bigger, far more dangerous than she could have ever imagined. Tom's eyes flickered with guilt, but it was quickly masked by a coldness that had settled into his features. He wasn't the brother she had known. He wasn't the person who had comforted her in her darkest moments. The man standing before her was a stranger, someone she barely recognized. She looked at him, then at Alaric, Susan, and Mark. It was a nightmare she couldn't wake from. She had thought she had control of her life, but now, every step she took felt as though she was being pulled deeper into a web of manipulation and deceit. Alaric stepped forward once again, his shadow stretching across the room, his presence suffocating. "You don't understand yet, Emily," he said calmly. "You've been playing by our rules all this time. The moment you woke up, you became a part of the plan. You just haven't realized it." "I didn't agree to any of this," Emily snapped, trying to steady her breath. "You forced me into this. I won't play your game." Alaric's eyes narrowed, a flicker of something dangerous crossing his face. "You don't get to decide how this ends, Emily. The plan is bigger than you. You'll do your part, whether you like it or not." The tension in the room was unbearable. Emily's mind raced. She had to escape. She had to find a way out. The realization that her entire life had been manipulated, the betrayal from every direction, the suffocating knowledge that she had been a pawn in someone else's twisted game, was too much to bear. But she couldn't break down. Not now. She turned to Tom, her voice thick with emotion. "Why, Tom? Why didn't you warn me? Why didn't you protect me from all of this?" Tom didn't meet her eyes at first. He stared at the floor, his face etched with pain and regret. Then, with a deep sigh, he spoke, his voice low. "I tried. You think I wanted any of this? I didn't have a choice, Emily. None of us did. The moment I was chosen, I became a part of something much larger than myself." "Chosen?" Emily's voice was incredulous. "By who? For what?" Mark, who had been silent for much of the conversation, finally spoke up, his voice weak. "You don't understand, Emily. There's no one person behind all of this. It's a system, a network of powerful individuals who've been operating in the shadows for centuries. We're just the tools they use to manipulate the world." Emily's mind raced as she tried to process his words. A system. A network. She wanted to believe it was all a lie, but too much was falling into place. Too many pieces of the puzzle were starting to fit together in ways that made her sick to her stomach. "You're saying that my whole life has been controlled by them?" Emily's voice cracked with disbelief. "That my choices weren't mine? That I've been a part of this twisted plan all along?" Alaric stepped closer to her, his voice cold and precise. "That's exactly what I'm saying. Your life, your decisions, they were all part of a much larger scheme. Your very existence has been orchestrated from the day you were born. You were always meant to be a part of the plan. Emily felt a chill run down her spine, but she forced herself to stand her ground. She couldn't let them win. She couldn't let them make her feel small, powerless. "You won't control me anymore," she said, her voice growing stronger. "I'm done being part of your plan." Alaric's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "You think you can walk away from this? You think you can escape?" "It's too late for that, Emily." Tom finally looked up, his face full of anguish. "It's true. We've been part of something too big to escape. But Emily, you're different. You always have been." "Different?" Emily repeated, her voice filled with frustration. "What does that even mean?" "You're telling me I've been chosen, that my life was planned from the start. But I never asked for this. I don't want to be a part of your plan." "I never did." "You don't have a choice," Alaric said, his tone final, his eyes cold. "The plan is in motion. And now you have to play your part." Emily's anger flared, but beneath it, she could feel a deep, gnawing fear. She was trapped. There was no escape. At least, that's what they wanted her to believe. She had to stay focused. She had to think. She turned to Mark. "You knew, didn't you? You've known this whole time." Mark's eyes flickered with guilt, but he didn't answer immediately. He swallowed hard before speaking, his voice low. "I didn't have a choice, Emily. I was pulled into this just like Tom. You have no idea what it's like to be under their control. The things we've seen, the things we've done. You're telling me I'm just supposed to accept this?" Emily shot back, her voice trembling with rage. "That I'm just supposed to accept that my life has been controlled by them? That everything I've ever known, everyone I've ever loved, has been part of the sick plan?" For a moment, there was silence. Everyone in the room seemed to be holding their breath, waiting for someone to make the next move. Then, a soft voice broke through the tension. It was Susan. "I'm sorry, Emily," she said, her voice thick with sorrow. "I never wanted you to be part of this. But it's too late now. You're already in it, whether you like it or not." Emily's mind reeled. Too late? Was it really too late? Was there no way out of this nightmare? For the first time since everything had started unraveling, Emily felt the full weight of the situation. But in that moment, she also felt a shift, a surge of defiance, of clarity. No matter what they said, no matter what they had planned, she wasn't going to let them control her anymore. She wasn't going to be a pawn in their game. "I'll find a way out of this," she said through gritted teeth. "And when I do, I'll make sure you pay for everything you've done." Alaric's eyes narrowed, but there was something almost impressed in his gaze. "We'll see, Emily. We'll see." With that, the tension in the room snapped like a taut wire. It wasn't over. Not by a long shot. But Emily had made her decision. She was no longer a piece in their game. She was going to take control. And she was going to fight for her freedom no matter the cost. Emily didn't sleep that night. How could she, with the weight of the truth pressing against her chest like an anchor? The hours dragged on, each minute feeling like a lifetime. As the first light of dawn crept through the cracked blinds, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring blankly at the wall. Her mind kept racing toward something, anything, that could make sense of what had happened, what was still happening. It felt as though everything she had known, everything she had built her life around, was an illusion, a lie. She wasn't in control. She never had been. The truth about her family, her brother, and her so-called friends, it twisted inside her gut. She had trusted them all, believed them to be her pillars of support. Tom had always been her protector, the one who understood her. But now he was nothing more than a cog in a much darker machine. And that machine? It was enormous, sprawling, controlling everything she thought she knew. The plan that Alaric spoke of wasn't just some small conspiracy. It was a network. One that spanned across continents, invisible to most, but powerful enough to influence governments, corporations, and every corner of society. Emily had been part of it, whether she liked it or not. She had been born into it, marked from the beginning. But she wasn't going to play by their rules. She couldn't. She had to act. Emily's thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock on her door. She froze for a moment, feeling a twinge of panic. Was it Tom? Alaric? Or perhaps someone else from their group, come to try to convince her to follow their twisted agenda? Emily? It was Tom's voice. Her breath caught. She didn't know whether to be relieved or afraid. Go away, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. I don't want to talk to you. Please, just let me explain, Tom said, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Emily's hands trembled as she pushed herself off the bed. She could hear the desperation in his voice, but she wasn't sure if she could trust it anymore. He had lied to her, betrayed her in ways she never thought possible. But then, she also knew that he was a victim in all of this, just like her. For a moment, she considered not opening the door, but the thought of facing this all alone was unbearable. She needed to know if there was more to the story, if there was anything that could make sense of what had happened. Taking a deep breath, she walked over to the door and opened it. Tom stood there, his face gaunt and tired, his eyes filled with sorrow. His usual confidence was gone. He looked vulnerable. Emily, I'm sorry, he said softly. I never wanted this for you. You have to believe me. I don't know what to believe anymore, Emily replied, her voice shaking with frustration. You've lied to me, Tom. All of you have. You've been a part of something awful. And now I'm stuck in the middle of it, trying to make sense of it all. I don't even know who you are anymore. I'm still your brother, Tom said, his voice thick with emotion. I always will be. But I don't know how to make this right. I didn't want you involved in any of this. But now you are, and we're both in this together. I'm not asking you to forgive me, but I am asking you to trust me. Just a little. Emily's heart clenched. She could see the pain in his eyes, the regret. But it wasn't enough. She couldn't simply forgive him. Not yet. She needed to understand everything, to know how deep this ran, and whether there was any way to fight it. Tell me everything, she demanded, her voice low but firm. From the beginning. I need to know what this plan is and what it means for me. I need to understand what you've gotten me involved in. Tom swallowed hard, his gaze drifting toward the floor as if he couldn't meet her eyes. You were never supposed to know. None of us were. The people behind this, they're powerful, Emily. More powerful than you can imagine. They don't just want control. They want to change the world, reshape it to fit their vision. They've been working behind the scenes for generations, and all of us, we were chosen to play a part in it. And what about me? Emily asked, her voice rising slightly. Why was I chosen? Why me? Tom's voice grew quieter. You're different, Em. I don't know all the details, but from what I understand, it has something to do with your potential. You were always meant to be a key player in this, whether you liked it or not. Your birth, it was part of the plan. Her heart sank as she absorbed his words. Her birth? She had been chosen from the moment she entered the world? For what? To be a pawn in someone else's game? Is that why they came after me? Why they've been manipulating my life from the start? Emily whispered, barely able to contain her rising anger. Because they knew I would play into their plan? Tom nodded, his eyes filled with a mix of regret and fear. Yes, but I didn't know any of this when I was growing up. I didn't understand the bigger picture. It wasn't until I was older that I realized the truth. And by then, it was too late. I was already in too deep. We all were. Emily's thoughts raced. There was so much more to this than she could comprehend. But one thing was clear, Tom wasn't the person she thought he was. He was part of the system. Part of the plan. And that system wasn't just some abstract concept. It was real. And it was powerful. I want out, Emily said, her voice hardening. I want to destroy this. Whatever this plan is, I'm going to stop it. Tom's expression faltered. You don't understand, Em. It's not that simple. You can't just walk away from this. If you try, they'll come after you. They'll make you pay. I don't care, Emily said, her voice resolute. I've already lost everything. My life, my family, my future. They took it all from me. But I'm not going to let them win. Tom took a step forward, his face filled with conflict. You're not alone in this, Em. I'll help you. We'll fight it together. Emily felt a flicker of hope in her chest. Maybe there was a way out. Maybe she didn't have to face this alone. But one thing was certain, she wasn't going down without a fight. She had been manipulated for too long, and now she was going to take control. She would uncover the truth. She would expose the system for what it was. And if she had to burn it all down to do it, then so be it. All right, Emily said, her voice steady now. Let's tear this down. One piece at a time. Tom nodded, determination in his eyes. We'll start tonight. As the door closed behind her brother, Emily felt a renewed sense of purpose. She wasn't going to be part of anyone's plan anymore. The fight was just beginning. The days that followed were a blur. Emily and Tom worked in secret, gathering whatever information they could about the shadowy network that had controlled their lives. Every lead they followed felt like another layer peeled back from a dark, tangled web. The deeper they dug, the more horrifying the revelations became. It wasn't just about power or control. This was about reshaping the world, manipulating entire systems, breaking down the boundaries between what was real and what was fabricated. And Emily was the key. She had been chosen for a reason, an intricate piece in a puzzle far larger than either of them had ever imagined. Tom was a reluctant participant, but Emily was driven by something far more powerful: vengeance. Vengeance for her life, for her family, for the lies they had been fed. She had always trusted the people closest to her, but now she knew better. Trust was a currency that had no value in this game. The only way forward was to tear it all down. They had a plan. It wasn't perfect, but it was the only one they had. They would confront Alaric, Susan, and the rest of the network head-on, expose them for what they were, and dismantle everything. But Emily knew that it wouldn't be easy. There would be no walking away unscathed. The night they planned to confront Alaric and the others, Emily felt a strange sense of calm. It was as though the culmination of everything, the shock, the betrayal, the confusion, had led to this one moment. Her hands didn't shake as they had in the beginning. Her thoughts were clear. She had a purpose. Tom drove them to a secluded estate on the outskirts of town. The mansion loomed ahead, an imposing, foreboding structure. It was quiet, too quiet, and that unnerved Emily. She couldn't help but feel that this place held all the answers she was both afraid and desperate to know. We can't back down now, Tom said, his voice tight with anxiety. I know, Emily replied, her voice firm. We've come this far. We have no choice but to finish it. They slipped inside through a side entrance, the darkness swallowing them whole as they moved quietly through the mansion's corridors. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint echo, seemed to make the house feel alive, as if it were watching them, waiting for them to make their move. They made their way to a small, dimly lit room at the back of the house. The door was ajar, and from within, Emily could hear voices: Alaric, Susan, and Mark, speaking in hushed tones. It was now or never. Emily nodded at Tom, signaling that it was time. Together, they pushed open the door and stepped inside. Alaric, who had been standing by the window, turned around, his eyes locking onto hers with a knowing smirk. You've come, Emily. I knew you would. You've lied to me, Alaric, Emily said, her voice icy. You've manipulated me, controlled me, and now you're going to pay for it. Controlled you? Alaric's smirk faltered for a moment, but he quickly recovered. You've never been in control of your life, Emily. You've always been part of something bigger. Something inevitable. You're right about one thing, Emily said, her anger growing with each word. I've never been in control. But that changes tonight. Tom stepped forward, his face pale. This has gone too far, Alaric. We won't let you destroy everything we know. Susan, who had been standing near the door, crossed her arms, her expression cold. You think you can just walk in here and destroy everything? This is bigger than you, bigger than all of us. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I don't care how big it is, Emily shot back. I'm done being a pawn in your game. Mark stepped forward, his face filled with guilt and confusion. Emily, please. You don't understand. We're doing what we have to do. We're saving the world. Saving the world? Emily laughed bitterly. By manipulating everyone's lives? By forcing us into your sick plan? You're not saving anything. You're controlling everything for your own gain. Alaric's eyes hardened. You've always been too idealistic, Emily. You don't see the bigger picture. But you will. Once everything is in place, you'll understand. I don't need to understand, Emily said, her voice steady. I know enough. I know that this ends now. She stepped forward, eyes locked on Alaric. For the first time in her life, she felt the weight of her own power, the power to choose, to act, to fight back. This was her moment. Without warning, she pulled out the device they had stolen earlier, one of the keys to unraveling everything. It was small, inconspicuous, but in her hands, it felt like a weapon. Emily, no. Tom shouted, but it was too late. Emily pressed a button, and the device emitted a low hum, signaling the start of their plan. Alaric's face twisted with fury. You think you can stop this? You're a fool. I'm not the fool here, Emily said, her voice cold. I'm the one who gets to decide what happens next. In that moment, the walls seemed to close in around them. Alaric's smug demeanor disappeared, replaced by a look of panic. You've made a mistake, he said, his voice shaking. You have no idea what you've just done. I know exactly what I've done, Emily said. I've taken back control. And that means you lose. The device beeped one last time before going silent. For a moment, everything was still. Then, the sound of sirens pierced the air, a sign that the network's control was being disrupted. Alaric's eyes widened, his mouth opening in disbelief. What have you done? He whispered. Emily looked around at the group, her voice filled with conviction. I've exposed the truth. I've torn down your system. It's over. The sirens grew louder, and suddenly, the doors to the room burst open, and law enforcement officers flooded in, surrounding them. The web of manipulation that had ensnared her life for so long was beginning to unravel. As Emily stood there, surrounded by the chaos she had just unleashed, she realized something important. She had done it. She had taken her life back. She had fought the system, exposed its lies, and in the end, she had won. Alaric, Susan, and Mark were led away, their faces pale, their eyes filled with a mix of disbelief and fear. Emily's heart raced, but she felt a sense of peace wash over her. This was the moment she had been waiting for. The moment when everything changed. And as she looked around at the wreckage of the life she had once known, she knew one thing for certain: she had died for 10 minutes, but what she saw in those 10 minutes had changed everything. Now she was free. And she would never be the same again. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?